Welcome to Looping the Labyrinth. My name is Awen. I'm a deadlifting druid, primal ritualist, and sometimes druidry teacher here in Los Angeles. Looping the Labyrinth is my arena to explore the deeper themes I am constantly drawn to, which often go back to a sense of vitalism, initiation in the present day, myth and ritual as two sides of the same coin, and capital T truth as we can stand it across different subcultures, paths, and mediums. On today's episode with piercer Nathan, we start off with a theme of pain as initiation, and we tangent off into everything from personal faith and religious mysticism into parenting, punk rock, and some controversial ideas. While I don't feel we get too in-depth into anything terribly graphic, there is some discussion of adult themes, like BDSM, sexual assault, and other topics that are not remotely suitable for children. Please do not listen around your kids. Not to patronize anybody, but please do use your best judgment, and know that listener discretion is advised. So without further ado, please settle in and enjoy today's conversation. I certainly did. Well, Nathan, I'm going to pretend that I don't know you. I'll briefly introduce myself for, whoever ends up viewing this. I'm Awen. I'm a deadlifting druid. I like to talk about mystical and strange things on the internet. And Nathan, I will let you introduce yourself. I don't want to forget anything. I might not even know your full bio or resume.
That's an interesting thing. My name's Nathan. I own Nathan's Tattoos and Piercings. Oftentimes people refer to vocations. I've been doing body piercing professionally for a little over 30 years now. We've been at our current location in Canoga Park for about coming up on 25 years now.
Congratulations.
And family man, have 2 young daughters, and like building things and like thinking about the world around me, and worldview is an interesting thing, and I think that's cool. The deadlifting druid.
Thank you.
Are there any other deadlifting druids out there? Is there a community?
Oh, I'm on the hunt. I'm trying to find us. I don't know. It sounds like an ideal husband for me personally, so I'll just put that out there. But what's really funny actually is, so I teach, I'm about to go on a bit of a teaching hiatus, but when I do, I'm usually at either the Crooked Path in Burbank or the Green Man store in North Hollywood, which I've been going to the Green Man since I was 17, and apparently they're not tired of me yet. And one of the really lovely staff, Jarrell, who teaches on shamanism, he was like, so I read your bio, like, what do you mean deadlifting druid? And I'm like, literally. Because there's, some people that do necromancy adjacent stuff in there. So I think he took it as like, I'm doing necromancy.
Lifting the dead out of graves.
Right.
Okay.
Which is I'm not that strong yet. So we're not quite there. I'm trying though. So anyways, so I where do I even start? So sometimes as a bit of a pretext, I have been apprenticing at Nathan's incredibly skilled studio for close to 6 months on and off the past month or so, because I'm juggling a few balls. But when I am there, something that really piqued my curiosity is that sometimes people have a wide variety of questions, and it's always interesting to listen to your answers because you have such an encyclopedic knowledge. But
thank you.
Of course, and it's what makes it fascinating to learn from you as well. But sometimes people will ask you about numbing cream or numbing anything, or there's perpetually like this fear about pain, and sometimes you give just a sort of more simpler, polite, professional answer, and there's nothing wrong with it. But sometimes you go on a bit of not a whole rabbit hole, but a bit of a longer conversation about, just like earning things and the value of pain through that. So that immediately, for anyone who's watched my stuff before, you already know, like, that's my favorite thing to talk about. Essentially, it's kind of a fixation for me. So I wanted to go down that rabbit hole a bit with you and just talk about, as someone that deals, with, you could talk about the pain element, you could talk about the marking yourself as a point of initiation in another realm, but I can either set up questions, or if you want to start talking about it, either way. It's my favorite theme.
Yeah. Why don't you ask some questions?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm very unstructured, so sometimes I like to just start ranting, but I guess where I would start is,
Yeah.
Obviously, I can't make anyone do that. But yeah, that's where I guess I'll ask, like, what are your thoughts on just intentionally sort of embracing uncomfortable experiences and what you glean from that? I guess let me start with, what do you glean from it yourself, and then what you observe.
I think when I was younger and a little bit tougher, I think for me, in modern U.S. society, they're two different things in the sense of what we're thinking and what we're feeling.
Yeah.
So our body and our mind don't always run in a parallel.
Yeah.
So I think embracing those things and trying to bring them together is important. And like you pointed out, there's multiple ways to do that. And going through experiences where I think we pull those together, that gives us more confidence in who we are, because we aren't avoiding things.
Yeah.
We're embracing them. So I think there's great power in that. And yeah, let me think how to phrase this. I think Gen X and baby boomers talk a lot about grit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe part of that is when they were growing up, some things you couldn't avoid.
Yeah.
In the sense of the physical and the emotional colliding or cohabitating, maybe a better word. And nowadays it seems like a lot of our problems of society can be a divide of those, where people don't want to feel, they don't want to address things. And that may have been something through time immemorial, but now with heavy opiates,
yeah,
and fentanyl and drug use and even weed,
sure,
marijuana can deaden what we're experiencing. So I have a philosophy of experiencing life head on,
yeah,
and sort of running into the fray and trying to be fearless and trying to embrace whatever comes. I feel makes us a stronger person.
Absolutely. And just to throw on top of that, something that I think about a lot is, even on an unconscious or not even a desirable level, like, I kind of feel like, just to hop right into it, our sanity is kind of under, it's under a bit of attack on multiple fronts, because we're constantly disassociating in front of these goddamn screens. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the screen addiction thing is something I've been wrestling with personally and discussing with my friends for like several months now, at the very least. And you see it with the iPad babies, and I'm like, so your kid has no chance. You're just frying their brain from the time they're like 2, however many months old. So by the time we're even conscious enough to take drugs that you're talking about, I think a lot of people are sort of already deeply desensitized. We're deeply disassociated, and a lot of people, my age and younger, talk about these, mental issues around disassociation. And I'm not saying that there's nothing else to it, but I don't think the screens are helping, to say the least.
Yeah, I would agree. And even if there's not necessarily a negative impact,
right,
of staring at it, just the time that you're losing.
Yeah.
You're losing other experiences. And I've been stuck in that, where I woke up in the middle of the night, insomnia. I'll scroll for 3 hours before I get back to bed. And then the morning I go, what exactly did I learn from that?
What did I just do?
I should have just got up. I would have been better off getting up and like baking something.
Absolutely.
Or
physically.
meal prepping or
right,
sweeping the floor. At least my insomnia would
be
cultivate in a more positive manner. So
absolutely.
Yeah. And it's I remember too, I was at a church with a sermon, and even the pastor, so you even have theological aspects of sects of Christianity that are embracing, like, feel your emotions, try
yes,
not to avoid them, feel pain, it puts things in perspective, and the sense of touch and feeling is so important to our emotional health, our physical health. I mean, pain can be a good thing. It lets us know, hey, you're having a problem.
Absolutely.
I'm a little bit overweight, and as I get older, I'm like, damn, my feet are hurting.
I'm feeling it.
And I go, well, wait a minute, maybe that's because I'm carrying around an extra 30 pounds. That's like,
sure,
putting some sort of sack on your shoulder and cruising around with. So,
Makes
so it's important indicators, and I think when we have that pendulum swinging where we can feel discomfort, and this was part of the theologian's perspective, is it puts things very much into perspective, where if we're able to feel pain in certain areas and we're able to experience pleasure to a great degree, and that almost falls into like a realm of S&M.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
And a core underlying path of it for a lot of people is having those extremes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting how closely the world can be walking and addressing the same issues, albeit maybe slightly differently with different verbiage. But I think there's an undercurrent where we're all saying, hey, let's connect what we're feeling, our mind and our body, essentially. That's essentially what it comes down to. How do we align those?
Completely. And that's really, as kind of time goes on, like I've sort of joked that because I went very heavy into the BDSM subculture as soon as I, became an adult, went very heavy for a few years and have kind of pulled back because I was joking that I was becoming a Cenobite and I got way too jaded and I had to step back. But that undercurrent, like that draws people to whatever their version of that is, that's what really interests me at this point, more so than whatever surface level, oh, I'm kinky, oh, this is my idea. I don't care. Like, I don't, respectfully, I don't, because I feel like it's a similar, and this is sort of just me ranting, I will circle back to the topic.
No, I'm into rants. I'm guilty of that as well.
Beautiful. Well, I love it. I'm bored, I'm deeply bored by this whole, flattening of everything, where I feel like the mind and the body are in different area codes, to say the least. We're deeply disassociated, and we have all these people who are, my age or younger, and are sitting around, writing these deep bios of, oh, I'm this, that, and the other. Here's all my labels. And it's like, how much of this are you doing in real life? How much life are you even experiencing? Mm-hmm. Because I am, if you know me at all, the last person on earth to, morally come at anyone for, this is gross and wrong, how dare you do it. It's more do it. Mm-hmm. Live in real life. My concern is more, you're further divorcing yourself from any kind of experience or, reality is a funky thing to say when you intentionally live in a sort of alternative, for lack of a better word, lifestyle, because you're trying to create your own reality in a sense. But to circle back to the sort of topic, one of my many favorite quotes from Carl Jung, and I'm butchering and paraphrasing it, is basically that neurosis is what happens when you refuse to suffer that which needs to be suffered. Mm-hmm. And that sort of comes back to me again and again when we're looking at people who kind of not to have a boomer opinion, but we're so used to being physically comfortable in many ways that even the idea of piercings are not they're not long and drawn out like tattoos, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm not trying to knock anyone, but it's fascinating to me, just for one, the aversion to pain, and for two, even in my much more limited experience of being part of the piercing process, it's interesting to see the spectrum, and I'm curious to see your experience with this, of people that will sit stoically like a rock for anything, which I like to imagine I'm closer to that camp, and then zero shame to them, but people who I was helping with a reopening, it was the easiest thing I've ever done, the simplest, it was like butter, it was open. This woman started dry heaving, panic attack, hyperventilating, and literally threw up, and I was like, okay, well, I would love to know what you're experiencing, because not that I'm not the expert, but it's not physical. I'm going to guess it's not physical.
100, I would agree with you 100% on that. Yeah. There's some people that come in, I've actually had people be really honest, where they come in and they're like, I'm just going to scream. When you do the piercing, I'm going to scream. Yep. I don't care how much or how little it hurts. They're just like, Fair. Get your ears ready. I'm like, okay, well, thanks for letting me know.
Cheers to that.
And some people just freak themselves out.
Yeah.
And it's sad, because that falls into a realm of anxiety.
Yes.
And anxiety doesn't help with anything.
Right.
whatever worldview you're looking at, the majority of them will say, what's going to come is what's going to come.
Yep.
And if we're going to sit there and fight those things, how is that helping us? How is that anxiety benefiting us? For this woman, obviously, it made her throw up.
Yeah.
It made your life a little bit harder because you're dealing with a woman throwing up.
Oh, yeah.
It makes it harder. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where I've had people that felt like they had to be really tough. I remember a couple years into piercing, there was this couple coming in. I think it might have been a butch and a femme lesbian couple, and the butch gal was getting pierced, and she felt, since she was butch, she needed to be super
tough.
Stoic and tough. And I'm like, cool, let's do this.
Yeah.
You know, great, you're sitting like a rock, let's do this. Boom, I thought everything was good.
Oh, no.
But in her mind was freaking out.
Yeah.
So a couple minutes after the piercing, 3-4 minutes, we're talking. I just see lights turn off.
Oh,
she
boy.
head-butted a cabinet, and got a little cut on the top of her head. And that helped me refine my processes of like, hey, even if somebody's looking tough, you still want them to sit down and recuperate and give them ample time to let any adrenaline rushes or any fears subside and let them just stabilize. That's super important. So sometimes even when people are sitting stoic, you don't know, but I think that's the goal in life, at least for me, is to not be a fake badass, but to try and be a real badass. To be like, hey, whatever's coming, I'm going to look it in the eye, whether it's 10 people running at me to kill me, or whether it's my daughters running at me to hug and love me. Whatever it is, embrace it to the fullest extent. And I think going back to, you were talking about screen time, I think a problem with that is people are busy building a persona oftentimes, which is a commonly talked about aspect of it. You meet somebody in real life and you're like, you aren't what you talked about, you know?
Not even a little,
You're like, you aren't even real. And those people know if we're trying to front on the internet or anywhere and create an image that isn't us, deep down we know we're BSing. You know, we know we aren't being honest. And we want to be honest with ourselves. And if we're putting on this facade, when we try and step into the real world, we're worried about being exposed. And I've been guilty of that. I think all of humanity has, but I think we should fight that and just say, hey, here I am in the totality of who I am. And that's one of the things that I respect about you, is you'll cross different bridges, you'll communicate. You're like a searcher, or an archaeologist that's not afraid to dig and see what they find. And I think that should be everybody's path.
I mean, it's the struggles that you have just in the attempt of being a real badass, as you said, and not a fake one. You obviously will still have problems, but I think those are preferable to indefinitely just like, sorry guys, this keeps going dark and I'm sure it's not actually turning off. I'm just making sure it's not. The struggles of indefinitely like wearing whatever mask you're trying to wear, it's vastly preferable, because at least you're fleshing out whoever you actually are, and kind of to your point of like, at least you can experience real life to the fullness of, be it, one side or the other. And I'm perpetually like quoting Jung and Nietzsche, but so I believe it was Nietzsche that sort of talked about how, probably, who knows, he talks about how people don't have ideas have people, by and large. And that sort of struck me especially deeply, because I feel like part of my path, whether you want to call it spiritual or whatever else, is to sort of at least be a conscious collaborator with the ideas that possess me, because I think, humans we're never going to be 100%, like I love the poem Invictus. I have literally Invictus tattooed on my toes. I truly love it. But I also don't fully believe, like, we're not 100% an island. The point is not to be like better than, the human experience. and I'm ranting a little bit again, but I feel like there's something to harnessing what inspires you and sort of weaving. There's this idea of like, even if you believe in fate, which I do, it's not something that happens to you. You're consciously weaving your life with it. And I have no idea why I'm bringing this up in relation to what you said, but it felt very relevant. I'll find my train of thought again with that. Anyways.
I think too we were talking about connecting the mind and the body physically.
Yeah.
But you were jumping on journeys of life of trying to figure out, hey, let me pick this path of whether it's like Druidry or whatever path you may choose. There's a certain amount, I think, if you are seeking a true, maybe I shouldn't say true, if you're truly seeking a path, there is going to be friction from outside of you, and that can be pain too. Paths that I've chosen to take are sometimes very challenging, where I'm like,
what am I doing?
I remember, for me as an adult, I felt like I had a lot of life figured out and a lot of life was going all right. I felt an emptiness. And for me, I chose a theological path, but it was funny with like a biblical based path. I felt like, I remember going to church and hating everybody in the church and trying to prove the pastor wrong. And I was like, I don't want this to be true because I know this path is going to be challenging. So I was running, personally, I was running from pain, not in a physical sense, but I was running through, I don't want to fall into some of these things because I'm smarter than everything else and I want to go in my path. So I think when you're on a path, there should be friction there. There should be pain, and we should embrace that. And once we walk through it, we may find something very fascinating on the other side. But if we aren't embracing that and passing through it, we aren't opening up these doors, we aren't exploring, we aren't being an archaeologist like you are, digging deep into things. We aren't uncovering these. We aren't turning over these rocks. And sometimes there's pain to turning over rocks psychologically and physically.
Inevitably. And I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about that, because I'm really intrigued by Jordan Peterson's, lectures on the Bible, and he does these really interesting, talk about Jungian, deep dives into, because contrary to popular belief, pagans do read the Bible sometimes. I was brought up by one Jewish parent, one Christian, and when I tried to reread the Old Testament as an adult, what immediately gave me pause was like, oh, there's 20 layers of symbolism happening. I see why people lose their minds trying to, touch on all of it. So it's fascinating to me to listen to Peterson's lectures on it, because he gets into that and ties it all together with his practice. And sometimes, so my father he's kind of more in the fundamentalist variety, and we sort of go back and forth about Peterson. I took him with me to go see him speak in Thousand Oaks once, because I'm like, okay, this is something we can bond on, for potentially different reasons. But he's like, I don't know why he doesn't just convert. I don't know why he's not just Christian. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, guys.
I'll take it.
Clocking in. But and I was like, okay, a little bit, you don't need to fully be part of a religion to see the value in it, but fair enough question, right? And in my various, I'm a huge podcast listener and, audiobook, whatever, and I am also very intrigued by Bishop Barron, who's one of the Catholic bishops, I believe, of California, and he's also trained in Jungian psych, really deep thinker, very just spiritual person. I think the Catholic Church needs more people like that, in my humble opinion. And he was having, I believe they've had a few, but in one of the conversations he had with Peterson, they were talking about that and why he's not fully part of it. And his answer is sort of, and I found this very sincere and painful, sort of close-ish to what you were touching on. And he just said that he doesn't take the burden lightly, and that he, has an idea of what it would mean to fully carry your own cross, as it were, and he's terrified of falling short. And I thought that was really touching and really, just sincere.
Mm-hmm.
And, like Bishop Barron, from what I've heard of him, is a very, like, empathetic kind of guy. And he's like, yeah, that's the feeling of every clergy member. Wow. We're all holding that every single day. But I still found that kind of touching. And I'm curious, like, how old were you when you kind of had that experience? Or
I think I was about 25.
Okay.
And it's interesting because a lot of people will call theology a crutch, and for me it was the opposite.
Totally.
Where for me it wasn't, hey, my life's falling apart, I need something to believe in. It was like, wow, life's going good and there's still something missing there.
Ooh, yeah.
So I think we should all be on that hunt for what is missing. I'm familiar with Peterson in the sense of name, and I think I've probably watched maybe 20 minutes
Sure.
of his stuff just randomly popping up, but having a 2 and 5-year-old doesn't lead a ton to
sure.
that. I'm more like doing
Bluey.
my best to go like, let me set the screens down, let's try and embrace the kids, let's try and do that. So I wish I had more time to read and podcast.
You're doing it all.
And such, but hopefully, since I can't really comment a whole lot on what he has going on, I know he's controversial, and I wish that with controversial things we would embrace those more.
That's what made me look into what he really had to say, is because I think people have all kinds of opinions based on, for one, it might not even be what he actually said, but what they heard about what he said, and then they kind of get scared and don't want to look further into it. But even at most, it'll be his commentary on, like, social issues, and I'm like, okay, to be honest with you, I have a varying degree of how much I care about that. He's a Jungian clinical psychologist. I'm interested in that.
Yeah.
He has, like, maps of, like, his books. I've read 12 Rules because, it's simple, it's very accessible, and it also made me realize, forgive me, why Michaela Peterson is so high on the hog crazy matrix. It's because she was on a lot of, his daughter was on a ton of opiates as a teenager for, like, chronic pain issues, and I'm like, that tracks. But his book before that, Maps of Meaning, I'm like, I have to read the fucking Bible to even understand this. Yeah. Because whoever wants, like, I'll re-rail myself in a moment, but if you want to criticize a guy for his social commentary, go for it. That's your right to do so. But he's not stupid. And that's, I think, like, a sort of low-level insult. And I wanted to piggyback on what you said about people thinking that religion is, like, some kind of mental crutch. That's, at best, a very mid-wit opinion that I really want to combat as much as possible. Because, and this goes back to, again, sort of the topic of, like, it takes a specifically uncreative kind of thinker to think that religion is just emotional weakness or delusion, because there's a reason why across time we, at the heart of it, just gather around fires and tell each other stories. Yeah. And when I like to use the term, sacred truth or mythic truth. And when I say sacred truth or myth, I don't mean fiction. I also don't mean history. I mean something that resonates on a different level and shouldn't be competing. Has no need to compete with science or with, like, it's not trying to achieve the same thing. Yeah. So you're kind of like you were saying, like, nothing's missing, things are going great, but it leaves one sort of thing that's unaddressed. Yeah, no doubt. And I think just whatever path people are seeking, it's important to seek that. I know for me in life, I sought different paths, and I just landed where I landed, and it's been interesting. I think things should, like we're saying, be a challenge. I think what you were saying, I'm not familiar with the Bishop of California, but if anybody gets a chance, a neat thing is there's up in Vina, California, there's the New Clairvaux Monastery. And there's Trappist monks there, which are really cool. Yeah. And I was in Egypt, and I went to some of the oldest monastic sites there, St. Anthony's and St. Paul's. And I'm a skeptic by nature, and I remember seeing a lot of the old Orthodoxy paintings with people glowing around their heads, where they'll illuminate around them. Oh, that's like right up my alley. And I just go, you know what? Whatever. That's some hippie, pardon my French, but hippie bullshit. I guess it's not French, but I'm like,
Like, nah, I've always been very skeptical, you know, because I'll have people come up and go, oh, your aura, and I'm like, let's just talk,
Cut the shit, yeah.
And but life is interesting. As we go on and we're open, I sense that aura in two places over at St. Paul's with a monk there and at New Clairvaux. I sense the same and saw the same thing with Father Bernard over there. And it's just it was a wild thing. It blew my mind. I'm like, this world is bigger than what I think it is, and I'm closing it into these realms of simplicity. Yeah. And that tracks back to what you were saying when you dig deeper into these books. You're like, wow, now I got to read deeper. In the past, we would embrace that because we're increasing knowledge, but we live in a society where the overwhelming majority is based on like little Twitter sound bites and little blurbs, and it's just people going, look at me, look at me, look at me.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's healthy. It's making us, it's dumbing us down quite a bit, where it should just be like, let me be at peace with me, let me dig deep. Yeah. Let me go and explore and figure things out. So people see these sound bites from Peterson, from Jordan Peterson, and they just make a quick assumption, try and put things in these simple boxes.
Oh, yeah.
And I think from my experience in life, when people live that way, eventually their brain starts exploding.
Oh, for sure.
They build a house of cards where everything tries to go in the right places, and once one truth gets exposed, and that gets pulled out, everything else falls apart. So we have to learn to think.
Get ahead of it, I feel like.
And we have to be willing to make U-turns in life. You know, for me, I've made a lot of pass a lot of wrong directions. I need to learn to not beat myself up about it. Grace, I think, is something that the modern world is lacking a lot, and empathy. And we need to remember to do that to ourselves and to others, because it's easy to beat ourselves up when if we walk in the wrong direction and we turn around. Sometimes we let that discouragement stop us in our tracks.
I want to ask you more about that. I do want to first throw out, so I have a friend that's, it's been really sweet to see her progress in life. We're a similar age. We met in high school. And we reconnected spiritually as adults in the past couple of years. And she's now a high school English teacher herself. And we talk a lot about, this is the one where we go back and forth about the role of social media and the internet and what have you. And she tells me that with her students, that they're terrified to say anything, to speak their minds, to potentially say the wrong thing, because there's this sense of surveillance at all times. There's this sense of like, oh, if I say the wrong thing, I'm not going to college. Like, I'm going to be hounded the rest of my life if I say something wrong at 15, however fucking old they are. And that really, I've already had a sense of that. I mean, she brought it up because I was saying that myself. I have this sense of like, even when I'm offline, I feel like people always have this feeling of an audience, which would drive anyone out of their minds. Yeah. I feel like there's, pre-internet poetry about people losing their shit for lesser things. So I feel like there's this, it's fascinating for me to see, and I think we had a sort of, months ago, like a rant about this, where like these quote unquote alternative subcultures, oh, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. We're sort of, I'm using the royal we here, but these alt subcultures are becoming, in methodology, sort of puritanical in the way that they suffered from when they were coming up. Like I have a friend who her mom is married to a musician in a pretty famous punk band, and she was talking about how in her day people were just like mean to them for having dreadlocks and piercings and this and that, and I'm like, yeah, now Jesus Christ, like we've become the bully in a lot of ways. So not to, I mean, I am deeply curious. I want to know more about like, how did you sort of progress on, you were talking about your sort of draw, spiritually, if you don't mind talking about it. And I'm curious how your draw to that and how you started piercing and how that evolved.
Those are interesting questions. guess let's talk about the piercing one first. I think just as a kid, it was trying to connect that mind and body aspect, being 15, 16 years old. And I would go with my brother to punk shows. He was a tour manager and stage manager, so he would bring me along and saw bands that had stuff done. I was just deeply fascinated by the art, and I was deeply fascinated by just that connection of mind and body. I was trying to figure that out. So there's just a deep intrigue, and it was something that happened very naturally and holistically. And I think in the modern world too, we all feel like we need this specific plan where we need to go on the specific path. And I think life is looser than that. Yeah. I don't think we need a whole lot of labels like you were saying.
Yeah.
I have a friend that would identify as like a butch lesbian. She's later 50s, a really dear friend of mine. Yeah. And she was out with some, younger kids in San Francisco, and one of the girls looked like a butch lesbian. She was like 20 years old, and she's like, "Oh, that's cool. You're a baby butch. Like, right on. Like, we got like a bond here. Like, hey, we're both sort of walking the same path." She's like, "No, I'm a boy with an I." Ooh. And then she was trying to and my friend's like, "I don't even know what the hell that is." Yeah. But certain thoughts of that came to me, where you have two people walking very similar paths and very similar lifestyles,
right?
And there's even division being caused there.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, wow, like, can't we just hang out and hear people out and listen to people without getting mad? We don't need to put ourselves in all of these categories,
To hop on that a little bit, that's something that really it really strikes me in such a negative way, because I feel like it speaks to this deep insecurity about yourself, to where it's like people think that everyone around them needs to reflect the exact same thing, and they all need to believe the same. And I'm like, I am more than happy to talk to some, I've repeatedly said I would rather be friends with a sincere Christian than a fake New Age type.
Yeah.
Because for one...
And vice versa.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. Absolutely.
Let's hunt for legitimacy.
Yes, please.
For, honesty and integrity.
Absolutely. Because, among other things, I'm not looking to someone else to confirm my principles. I'm quite secure in what they are, and also I'm very open to learning more. I want to hear about your life experiences. I'm not looking for a confirmation bias or an echo chamber kind of situation. And I feel like with, again, this fear of looking wrong to other people, fear of saying the wrong thing, looking like you have to uphold this perfect image all the time, it's no wonder people are losing their mind. No wonder everyone is complaining about anxiety and depression and this and that. It's again, there's a ton of other factors. I'm not going to even get into them, but we are in large part kind of doing it to ourselves. And there's so much more, just personally, there's so much more joy in genuine curiosity. And something that I find deeply inspiring is people are always, I feel like, on their soapboxes online and sometimes in person, and with all this little infighting we have going on. The person who, in my mind, made some of the biggest empathetic differences you can make in this life was this guy, Daryl Davis, who...
he was the musician.
Yes.
Yeah.
Black man, who, jazz musician, who went out of his way to... He ended up talking I don't even know how many hundreds of KKK members out of their robes, and he did it by befriending them and having empathetic conversations and meeting them as human beings. And that's it.
And I think whatever our outlooks are, I'm not a fan of the orange man. I'm not a fan of the guy who's running the country that seems a little bit lost and confused. I'm not really a big fan of either. I'm not going to beat up anybody politically, but I'm just looking around going, oh man, which venereal disease do I want more than the other? It's oh man, what do we do here? It's really scary. And when I start feeling those fears and those anxieties, something I've talked to my wife about is we need to simplify the world. We may not be able to figure out and control what all these rich lobbyists are doing in Washington and what the president's doing, but I can affect my neighborhood.
Yes.
I can give my neighbor fruit that I have from my tree, or I can hire a younger kid to help me come work around the house and learn how to use tools because maybe their dad isn't present in their life or something along those lines. So I think there's certain cardinal truths that whatever your worldview is and your path is are beneficial. I think was Daryl Davis, right?
Yes.
Yeah, great documentary if people get a chance to hunt it down.
Incredible.
But for him, we could look at his life and use him as a test where he wasn't just living life angry.
No.
That man had an immense amount of love, an immense amount of grace, an immense amount of courage.
In no small part, because that, to me, that's real courage, because it's easy to be like, I want to get in someone's face and I'm going to scream at them and tell them what's what and what's wrong. And I'm like, cool, all you're doing is giving them more fuel to hate you, actually.
Yeah.
And I get it. It's hard to have, as you're saying, that kind of grace. It takes patience. It takes, a strong degree of self-worth of knowing no matter what this person says to me doesn't reflect who I am, and having that persistence of I'm going to keep showing up and treating this person like another human being until they can see my humanity or not.
Yeah. And that's commendable. And it's, and I'm sure with that, the immense amount of success that man had is commendable. But with that, how many other people just would throw a racial slur at him and just
keep
piss off, And maybe he's trying and hoping for positive results. And sometimes we keep banging our head on certain doors and they never open, and that teaches us persistence and steadfastness, and it teaches us to know that we're making the right decisions, even if we aren't getting the results that we need. So I think we need to find those cardinal truths. The church that I went to in my mid-20s, it was funny. I was with my friend that's talking about that is butch lesbian, and my other friend Roman, is heavily pierced gay man. Now he's more of a bear. As he's gotten older. But at those times he was probably closer to a twink. But, everybody makes their transitions. But Simi Valley had its first gay pride festival.
Wow.
And we know Simi Valley as protesting during the Rodney King era. There was like little KKK or racist things going on at the courthouse, and as punk kids we would go and protest. And so Simi Valley has always traditionally been sort of a gnarly place, with what I would consider some backwards thinking from a lot of the people there. Changed over time, and there's always going to be the rays of hopes in any amount of darkness wherever you are. But when I was there was signs of like fags burn in hell, and that's hurting me because I'm with my friends who I love dearly, and I have people that don't even know them talking horribly about them. And the church I ended up going to was passing out, the irony of it made me laugh. They were passing out big stick popsicles at a gay pride parade.
Fabulous.
And they were just saying, hey, we love you. We care about you, and that was commendable, because that's where everything starts. If we're hunting down cardinal truths, just starting with a foot of love, starting with a foot of, hey, let me get to know you. Maybe we think differently, but maybe through talking I'll learn something and you'll learn something. For me, as a kid, I was molested, and that created a lot of anger in me, like when I was a teenager. And I remember this anger like manifesting, and I had like a flyer or something on the wall, and I put it like, fags burn in hell or something, or fags, you know, this or that. And that was a reaction to trauma that was done to me that was manifested poorly. And then as I got into high school, I had like a couple of my closest friends come out of the closet. I go, I need to reevaluate my anger towards this. And I go, these people have been nothing but a blessing in my life. And that changed my perspective. At that crossroads, I could have held on to my anger that was from childhood trauma and been like, okay, I disown you, you know? Yeah. But instead, I sat and I processed it. And getting back on the topic of pain, those paths are painful because I'm having to, at that time, uncover childhood traumas, address those traumas, process through those traumas, and at the same time go, hey, these are my friends, these are people I love. So we ended up going to the path like in the early 90s where I would sit on panels and talk about, hey, we should love, we should care, we should, you know, connect with each other, and we're all different as human beings, and thank God we are, because if we weren't, the world would be a crappy place, you know. Sometimes my wife goes, how are you feeling? I go, if I was feeling any better, there'd be two of me. And she goes, that's a really scary thought. And if I multiply me by 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, that's a really, really scary thought, you know.
The value would be sorted.
But in bad ways too.
Sure.
I forgot the English guy's name, but he was you know, just thinker in England in the late, I think 40s and 50s, and there's a commentary that, or the editorial thing that came out of the paper that said, hey, what is a problem with modern society? And we can all sit there and dig deep. We scratched a little bit of the surface of some of that, but he wrote in, and it was the shortest letter to the editor that was ever published, and it was brilliant. It was 3 words, and it said, sir, comma, I am. I think we need to put the mirror on ourselves, and sometimes I'm feeling like I got things figured out, and I got the world figured out, and I'm the best thing since sliced bread, and you know, I'm kicking ass and taking care of things and solving everything. Then the next day I fail as a parent or as a husband or as a friend or as a boss, and that happens. I'm just like, oh man, you know, we don't want to live in that part of us, but I think it's important for us to identify, hey, these are, we bring our own problems to the table, and when we forget about that, when we forget about that nature of ourselves, it's easier to try and stand holier than thou or stand bigger than thou. And I think if we set the image to perfection, we all fall short of that perfection. And if we're all falling short of perfection, we're all sort of equally as fucked.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and forgive me, let me go back to, we both went on really interesting rants, I think. How did you find piercing that you were talking about?
Oh yeah, no, that's so just working with bands. There was a band called like Haunted Garage my brother worked with, and I saw them with piercings, and there's another, you know, just through rock and roll, and I just became fascinated. And there was 2 shops in LA. There was a Gauntlet and Crystal Cross, who did Primal piercings, later was working at Jill Jordan's shop, Red Devil. So there was 2 piercing shops, and I was way out here in the valley, and I was just intrigued by it. And it was funny, when I would go to the Gauntlet, I wasn't 18, but I would go in there being like, oh, I saw you guys at this show, because it was a small community. So I don't know if we lose.
It looks like it's still on. Thank you, though.
Okay,
cool.
Perfect. There we are.
Yay.
So I would be like, oh, I saw you at this show or that show. But I was sneaking into all these shows because my brother would bring me in the back door and use me as free labor.
Oh, yeah.
and I wasn't complaining. I was having a great time.
You're like, I'm here.
So I was getting pierced at 16, 17 years old. And I would get apprenticeship piercings from the apprentices at the shop because that way I could pick up and learn more. And thankfully, my family had a video camera so I could videotape processes and go back to them now. And YouTube is a reality. I love it, but now people can go, oh, let me just type something on YouTube.
Anything, yeah.
But back then I'm like, okay, I need to bring somebody, document this. Is my battery good? Is my tape good? Are we getting good angles? And, just learn from that. And there was different magazines. Fakir did his magazine, Body Play.
Yeah.
And you would have, Gauntlet had a article in their magazine called Pierce with a Pro, and you'd pick up on little things from that, and talking to friends that were nurses or their moms were nurses, and just trying to learn wherever you could. And now what took me probably 5, 6, 7 years to figure out, I'm able to teach in 6 months. And part of me gets a little bit jealous, but everybody's path is everybody's path to embrace. And I go, man, I can take this and compile it now. So it's just neat how the industry has grown. It's a little bit different now, but things change. Change is something that we can't stop. And I think as we get older, we embrace the good old times or what we're familiar or comfortable with. But you look at any segment of society and it changes drastically within a span of a life.
Oh yeah. And you mentioned Fakir, and that's someone that I'm surprised I didn't get really into his stuff sooner, because it's right up my alley personally. You mentioned once that you took one of his classes. You told me a little bit about it in the studio, but I'm curious if you would mind talking a little bit about it. Yeah. It sounded a little funky, but it was interesting.
Life is interesting, and I'm more of a skeptic. And earlier on, I talked about boxing things up, but I like to have a good grasp on things, and I like to have a certain amount of confidence in who I am and what path I'm going. But I signed up for a class, and the classes weren't cheap, and you're having to travel up to San Francisco, figure out lodging, whether that's sleeping on somebody's floor, and gas and food, and figure all this stuff out, and you're away from work. And I remember it being a bit of a sacrifice of saving up and figuring things out. So we go up, and it's a branding course. And there was some guy, I can't remember, some people you just don't click with. And I just didn't click with this dude. And there's a certain amount of humor in it, because I think God was teaching me to love. A lot of times there's certain hurdles that I have where I find myself in positions where I learn to be more loving. And it's funny because they aren't traditional. One of them when I was younger was yuppies and outlaw bikers. Those were 2 hurdles I had. And I was working at the church pantry. Oh wow! And there was a guy who was the old president of the Hell's Angels in the Valley, and getting to know him, I learned to sort of get over some of my prejudices. And when I went to church in Simi Valley, there's a lot of yuppies out there, and it helped me to understand better and how to love better and have good communications with people. So maybe with this guy, God, or however it's perceived by people, the powers that be, for me it's God. It's teaching me okay, embrace this, even though this is a guy you get along with at least. But we all had to hold hands in a circle, and Fakir was walking us through some meditation where we had something coming out of our anal chakra, and our tail was going down into the middle of the earth, a tail that grew out of here. And part of me, I'm thinking like, bro,
Okay.
this wasn't in the class description. I'm going to learn like branding or scarification or whatever it was.
What does this have to do with branding? Yeah.
I'm like, rectal tail chakra growth wasn't in the description.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I really paid all this money to sit here and stare at some dude that I don't like and have our tails intertwine in Midgard or wherever it was taking us, you know. So it was just it was sort of an interesting experience, but you know,
it wasn't it for you.
But for me, I like to glimpse, I like to deep dive, I like to try and understand, I like to dig into culture. When I worked with music in my young days, I did a lot of like basement punk rock shows, and I worked with my friend Paul at Delicious Vinyl Records. He was a VP of marketing, and we did little projects together and record label stuff together and put out bands and whatnot. And I remember when I talked to him, he goes, Nate, I got you figured out to a degree. With it, what I was really into was a culture of music. It wasn't that I wanted to be a musician, or it wasn't like I just want to be an audiophile with my headphones on, just listening to music and critiquing each note. I enjoyed the music, but truly what my love is culture, and that's a beautiful thing where we can travel and we can experience and we can learn and we can. That's just so much more important than, I think, education or being able to memorize a book, or and there's value in reading, there's value in these things, but experiencing culture, I think, is the best thing, one of the best things that we can do as humans.
Absolutely. I think they're sort of incomplete without each other. I've been going back and forth with some of my favorite humans recently about like, just sort of the role of, or I was kind of bitching it about just feeling a little overwhelmed by not knowing where to start with just nerdy stuff. Like I'm torn between, I really want to read more Jung, more Nietzsche, but then at the same time, just as myth, as literature, if nothing else, I keep feeling like everything else that I'm interested in doesn't make sense if I don't fully read the Bible as an adult, because it's kind of the most referenced, like so much is just based on that, and I feel like my understanding is limited if I don't dive more into it. And I'm like, great, I don't know where to start. I've got the Red Book here. I've got like Genealogy of Morals, which is a motherfucker, to say the least. And I texted one of just the most brilliant. The guy who's done most of my tattoos, Pat, in Vamachara in New York, where I've taught on ritual BDSM actually, and he sort of pointed out, he's like, even like Nietzsche would say, like, all the wisdom in the world is inferior to, the wisdom in your body, essentially, of just living life as it is and not overly stressing about stuff. And I respect that, but at the same time, they're sort of like the classic, like, Thucydides piece of wisdom where he says, the society that separates its scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools.
Wow. Yeah, that's brilliant.
To this day, for sure. So I'm sort of like, I want to have, and also the druid in me, that I'm very inspired by that sort of idea. I'm striving for that balance of like just enough like engaging with wisdom, because I think that like reading knowledge in that regard, it's important in the sense that it does equip you with kind of more tools for life, and you can understand things a little bit more richly. But then on the other hand, living it as well, because like something that I find, one of the many things I find cool about the druids was their training, as it were, would be in 3 stages. There's what's called the sort of bard, ovate, and then druid. And in your bardic phase, you're diving deep into myth, you're memorizing epic poetry, you're learning how to tell a story. And I think sometimes when we read history, like, it can come across way more dry than it actually is. And so whenever I'm reading, I look for the humor, I look for the juiciness, I look for the sexiness, because people don't change that much, I think. And so I think in large part, the bards, they weren't just memorizing a bunch of stuff, to memorize it. It's, you're looking for what can connect people.
Yeah.
And then in the sort of ovate stage, you're learning the sexy, the magic part, the divination, the whatever. And then finally, the sort of druid stage is people forget, like, they wore a lot of hats. They were they would be the ones that would uphold, like, community disputes. They would settle. There was actually a fine where if a man did not uphold his bedroom duties with his wife, he would pay her a fine. He would actually have to pay her money. If it was due to negligence, which I find kind of fair, because, like, if you had a medical problem, it was okay. So you can't just be mad at it for... Anyways, where I was going with this is basically, I'm very drawn to the sort of, like, meet life head on, spend your time in the armchair, but don't live there.
Yeah.
I'm very, very big against, like, living in the armchair. So anyways, before I sidetrack myself, go for it.
I think there's a couple neat things going on there.
Mm-hmm.
I think even when you look at, you were talking about the 3 stages. When I was younger, I was a mason, and you have the apprentice, fellow craft, and master. And I've thought about stuff too, applying to our lives when you can almost say there's 3 stages of life where we go, okay, we're young, we're sort of looking around, we think we have the answers, and then the next stage is you go, wow, I don't know shit. And then you're like I thought I'd be an adult and I would just get out and sort out the world and everything would run perfectly.
Oh yeah.
And then you spend quite a few decades just getting beat up, knowing that you don't know everything. But hopefully you keep pushing forward.
Yep.
And you never quite figure everything out, but I think hopefully through experiences, wisdom is acquired. And you were talking about the armchair and getting out and doing things. And I've heard that talked about in modern day churches where some churches are very much, hey, let's not worry about theology and learning. Let's just go out and do, feed the poor, care for those in need, widows, orphans, and that's very important to do. But I think it's neat where you can use an airplane analogy where if you have one wing, you're going to spiral out of control. So I think when you're digging into the meat and potatoes, you're realizing more of your identity and who you are and what you were meant to do and what your purpose is. But you need to get out of there and go and apply it. Or if you're applying it, I think it's important to get in the armchair. And it's hard. I think as humans, we're inclined to one or the other. So there's a certain, going back into the pain thing, there's a certain pain of going, I need to force myself to sit down and read. I need to force myself to get out and face my fears and engage society. So in a meaningful way, because if we hold this knowledge to ourselves, what benefit does it do? And I remember reading the book of Ecclesiastes, which is believed it's written by King Solomon in the later years, and biggest pimp of all time, had a harem of 1,000 women or whatever it was, had all the land, had all the resources, and he's reflecting on life at the end of his life. This is a guy that probably had the best, library and the best people to consult with and the most intelligent people around him. He's like, a lot of books have been written, but he goes, in a way, if you just dig too deep into that, it will spin you out of control, He says, hey, this can actually be like a snare, a trap.
Oh, yeah.
And some people look at that wrong and go, hey, I don't need to read. I don't need to be
That's
smart.
That's not
it. It's like, no. You got to find a middle road and find a deep purpose. And that's what he was in search of as an older man. And it's interesting, as we get older, we start feeling our feeling that we aren't going to live forever. We start, when I was young, I thought, I'm going to live forever, I'm going to conquer everything, if somebody wants to fight, I'll knock them out. If there's a mountain to climb, I'm going to climb it. I was fearless, and that's what it was all about. But now I'm starting to learn my mortality as I get older, and that's an interesting phase to be at. I brought my daughters to a little punk rock festival this last weekend, and I'm trying to have them on my shoulders, and my daughters want me to swing her around, and I'm doing it because I want them to have a good childhood. But I'm like, now it's like when I was younger, pain was connected sometimes to like kink and different fun things, and now it's like pain now is connected to I want to give my kids everything, and I'm like going, man, there's a pain in this where my daughter's going, hey, Dad, put me on my shoulders and swing me around, and I'm like, okay, I'm doing it, but I'm like, man, where's the ibuprofen? Or when is this going to be over so I can just sit in a car for an hour on the drive home?
Absolutely.
You know? So life is important, and I think it's important that we try and seek our elders, not just me going, hey, young whippersnappers, give me respect. But I think something we've lost in the U.S. is we don't have this multi-generational bond. Each generation is living on their own, and there's, hey, maybe I'll see you on the holidays or for birthdays or whatnot. But I think it's important to have this bond of different generations, and it's healthy for everybody. I think everybody benefits from that. And I think you were contemplating, hey, what do I do? Do I dig into this now? Do I dig into that? Where do I go? As long as we're digging. You know, as long as we're digging, we're doing what we're meant to do.
That's huge.
And you never know where life will take you. When I was young, I thought at this stage in life I'd be an executive in the music industry. The music industry doesn't exist the same way it did when I was in it. And piercing just sort of naturally ended up growing. I was working, doing it as I was in the music industry, and as the music industry started to taper down for me, that started picking up for me. So we don't really need to worry. I think, you know, you talked a little bit about fate. We could talk about faith. Like, we're going to be all right. You know, I know I can afford to skip a couple meals if I ever have to sleep outside under a tent. It's been done before. There's times where I'm very blessed. There's times where I'm still blessed, but I don't have as much. But that can be a blessing in and of itself. You don't have to worry. The more keys sometimes we have on our key ring, the more problems we have to deal with, the more credit cards we have on our Apple Pay. It seems like a blessing, and it can be in certain regards, but you know, everything turns into its own form of headache. So I think just learning to simplify life, embracing core tenets that we can see as universally beneficial are, I think, valid paths for everybody to pursue.
Absolutely. And to get out one last question, and then I don't know how long we've even been talking, but I've been very interested. If I can ask, like, what drew you into spirituality or your religious path?
I think for me, I ended up, I grew up in a family that was Christian, for whatever that means. I had parents that, my opinion are, they were very closed off. I think the baby boomer generation didn't really address things well. There was this idea of just, hey, push forward and do what you need to do. But so much was getting suppressed where they didn't know really how to deal with it. And my parents, whenever we would go into a church as a kid, I'm like, cool, I'm making friends or whatever, you know, cool, we get to draw pictures, you know, whatever, we can play. It was fun. We get snacks, you know, this is awesome, you know. Whenever we get deeper in somewhere, the church would get to know my parents better, and they would maybe start trying to embrace and connect and go through like the pain of growth, which is learning, looking at ourselves and saying, hey, maybe I could be living life better this way. You know, my dad abused prescription drugs and alcohol, very brilliant guy. He was a professor, so it's easy to say, hey, I'm a professor, I'm smart, I know what I'm doing, you know, I know all the side effects of this, I know I have the physician's desk reference memorized forward and backwards. There can be all these elements where you can be all right with this stuff, but my family, when a church would start to know them and stuff would start to get uncovered. It's like, oh, they're judgmental. We're out of here.
Oh, shit.
So I grew up just hating the church. And when I found skateboarding and punk rock and low quality malt liquor and different things like that, I was just living my own life. And I said, nope, not for me. You know, those people aren't for me at all. And I started investigating other beliefs and being of Scandinavian descent, you know, like as a kid, we'd always read Thor comic books. And like, that seems, in my mind, that seems awesome. Like, I love watching like the Vikings show, and I love reading about Norse mythology and such. And I'm like, cool, like, go and kick ass. Like, I go and get in a fight, and if I get killed when I'm older, I'm going to Valhalla because I was a badass. You know, I'm like, cool, let's do this, you know? But for me, what I realized was that path was almost too easy. Because I'm like, I can do this. Drinking mead out of a horn.
Sign me up.
You know?
Totally.
I'm like, let's do it, you know? So for me, that seemed almost too easy and not really challenging who I was. So I sought out different paths, you know, read up on Buddhism and talked to people about Buddhism, read some of the Quran. In my mind, in my logical mind, because I can be very logical, I go, the world's this big. We have so many Hindus, we have so many Muslims, we have so many of this divided up. I'm like, who's to say that they aren't right? So I sought that out. And I think what it was for me when I started digging into more of a biblical-based faith was I would get challenged in areas that I was uncomfortable with. And I said, let me embrace this. And when I would embrace it, it was almost like, for me, there was some sort of treasure being unlocked. Like going into being sexually abused as a kid, the concept of praying for your enemy is counterintuitive to who I want to be. What I want to do is, if I have an enemy, I want to go and sneak up on them in a back alley, put a 45 to their head, and blast them. Like, that's inherently where I would more easily be drawn. That's why, like, the whole Viking thing, I'm like, badass. It's in my blood. It's in my, you know, let's do this, you know?
There is a part of the Havamal where, with the sayings of Odin, where he says, and I'm paraphrasing, but when you have an enemy, you know, give him no peace. Just straight. It is a war. It is a warlike religion. Absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I love that. But for me, when I started digging into theological based stuff, I would pray for my enemies, those that abuse me, and that was, I can't think of any other word but fucking hard. That was an incredibly hard path to travel, you know, going, man, this person hurt me at my core, and let me pray for them. And the prayer wasn't like, oh, let them have these wonderful days. The prayer was, hey, this person is sick. Heal them because they're sick. And for me, when I embraced that, as hard as it was to walk that path, it gave me a great amount of like release and peace afterwards, because I wasn't thinking, where can I get a gun or a bat or whatever? Where can I take this person out? And am I at peace, like going to prison? Like, what would I say in the court? Would I get pity for past transgressions from them? You know, doing all that and hyper focusing on that kept me away from who I was meant to be, which I believe is a good husband, a good boss, a good father, a good friend, you know. So it allows this baggage to be removed, where you can, if you have a finite amount of space, the more crap that we pull out, the better stuff we can put there. I used to like drinking a lot. I had great times drinking, you know, in my mind. I'm like, cool, this is insane. I like the unpredictability of where will this go tonight, you know? And I love that. But then as I started reading, it's like, okay, well, can drink. Jesus turned water into wine. He knew how to put on a party. But then there's this other side where drunkenness isn't good. So in my world, I'm like, okay, let me live in this between area where it's
Sure.
like I'm not drunk, but wow, that's sort of like a
Feeling
cool
it.
buzz. We're having fun. People are laughing more, but it becomes this fine path that's can be trickier. But as I started living more life, trying to be in that realm, periodically I cross over that line. But it's more like, okay, this is healthier. I can actually remember the night.
Yes.
I didn't get in a fight, or I didn't let my emotions turn out in anger that ended up in some sort of destructive way, or my liver likes me more the next morning, or whatever the case may be. So for me, my thing is like, I love drinking. Let me do this the rest of my life. I like drinking in excess, but as I started going, well, let me go and look and see if it says this. Let me find let me try it out.
Yeah.
And as I would do that, positive things would start happening in my life. So I think that's where the difference was for me in trying to live out other worldviews.
That makes sense. And I think that it sort of speaks to this quality. Sometimes I think about, like, what is, especially like to go back to like when people think that religion or belief is inherently like delusional or emotional mental weakness, what have you. You try to think about like what is the function, not to sterilize it, but what is the function of belief? How does it play out really in real life? What does it functionally mean? And you look at like, what are we even trying to do here? And sometimes like I'll look at religions and think like, what is just the core MO? And I very well could be wrong, but I look at Christianity and think, okay, forgiveness, mercy, that seems like a sort of core thing. Whereas with something like Asatru, the sort of Nordic gods, it's sort of like warrior, heathen, honor code type stuff. It's a different focus. It's not so much like one is right or wrong in my mind. It's like we're focusing on different things. And I speak for absolutely no one because I'm homebrewing half my shit. Yeah. My sort of focus tends to be sovereignty, because not to sound too much like a libertarian per se, but like I think that like, we can agonize over being good people, and there's a pagan thinker now who I probably wouldn't be friends with, but I like his work, Jack Donovan. I'm very drawn to his writing. I think he likes men more than women, though, so we wouldn't get along. But he talks about, no disrespect to him, he talks about being good at being a man prior to agonizing over being a quote-unquote good man. And I think that there's food for thought there. So when I think about sovereignty, it's this sort of, when you're hitting it from the back, as my bard friend would say, you're trying to reverse engineer metaphysics in a way. Yeah. You're looking at what actually brings that about, right? And like, just looking at the sort of like what actually makes you a better person functionally, like, and sort of how like discipline ultimately brings about more liberty, brings about more freedom in your life. Yeah. If you're looking for more room to breathe, to live your life, being more disciplined, at least most of the time, will bring that about. And, what you're sort of talking about in terms of head-on addressing areas that are, not easy for you, or like are more challenging, I have a ton of respect for it, because I feel like that also sort of speaks to that idea of like you're seizing, Tolkien had this really cool quote in The Lord of the Rings, among many, where I think it's Legolas or Gimli says that someone was served luck, but they seized it with both hands. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like not allowing yourself to just be possessed by whatever ideas come your way through nature, nurture, what have you, and being like, no, I'm gonna collaborate and not control, but like put a stronger influence on the ideas that design my life, in a sense. Yeah. And there's this sort of idea of like in modern Druidry. There's a group called Arnriach Féin, which is like a modern druidic organization. They say they're international. There's like one grove in Ireland. Okay. We're mostly American, let's be real. I say that with love. And they, let's be totally honest.
Maybe one day.
Right. Yeah. But they have let's call it like the sort of 9 druidic virtues, one of them being moderation. And it says that basically moderation is to not be driven to ill health either by excess or abstinence. And I like where that sort of, you're talking about sort of where that kind of spits you out of like, okay, I'm not 100% sober. I'm also not invoking chaos by like getting rip-roaring drunk all the time. There's somewhere in the middle, and that kind of goes back to like, just trying to be I would call it being sovereign in your own life, but people have their own focuses, so I will prevent myself from getting distracted again. And if there's any kind of note you want to end on, I don't want to take up your whole day.
No, this
cool.
is fun. I mean, I guess when you post this, we'll see in the comments if boring people or not,
I'm optimistic because I used to think that, I should make podcasts as short as possible. People always talk about, everyone's attention span is so short. And some people's are, right? But for everyone that has this, fully talked, TikTok brain, iPad baby brain, there's also a ton of people, not to sound arrogant, like us, that are looking that are desperately wanting to be spoken to like adults, that want those long-form conversations. So I have no idea where my stuff will go, but a personal goal for me is I'm no longer censoring myself before I even speak, because I think that's deciding on people's behalf, what they're adults enough to hear. And to, circle back to some of the, pre-surveillance wanting to sound right all the time stuff, I'm personally very sick of being patronized in that way.
That's reasonable.
Yeah.
And I mean, if people look at it and go, man, that guy's ugly,
cool,
you got control,
Yeah.
You can put a piece of tape over my head or whatever, or turn it off, or whatever. But I think talking about it, I think other universal truths, talking about it is something I found beneficial, is just removing the chaos, the sense of meditation, and just making the world quiet so we can hear better. We talk about screen time, and there's all these distractions in the world, and everything's competing for you.
Right.
And when we can shut that down, a lot of the great paths and faiths have figured that out.
Yeah.
When you look biblically, Jesus would get crowded and he would say 3 words and be like, "Cool, peace out,
Yes.
I'm going to go up the mountain." And that's counterintuitive to somebody who's, if you think they're trying to start a world revolution, they go, "Great, I have a big crowd, here's my moment."
Yeah.
He'd be like, "You know what? I need some peace. I need to center my mind. Give a couple words. Here you guys go.
Think about it.
I'm out of here. I'm gonna take this boat over this lake. Stay the hell away from me for this time. I got to have time to think." And I think whatever path we're choosing, we need to take that time to be quiet and take those moments and be fearless in those moments for whatever comes into us, and look around and see nature for what nature is, and see humanity, see the world, focus on ourselves, reflect on ourselves, and understand where we need to grow, so we aren't just these mindless beings running around, which I'm guilty of much often. My wife will gladly second that, bing, bing, bing. I'm just, going.
It's easy.
And,
it's easy too.
But it's important, I think, for us to enjoy life, but to have those moments of quiet, because we don't have enough of those in modern society.
Absolutely. And something that I, maybe people that listen to my stuff more than once are bored of hearing me talk about this, but I think it's important to whatever I care a lot less about whatever the, forgive me, window dressing of someone's beliefs are, and I care more about the moving parts of what are your principles, what do you value, how does that play out in real life. And so I like to look at, Jung, Nietzsche, Mircea Eliade, and Joseph Campbell, and these sort of comparative mythology, archetypal sort of perspectives, because especially what draws me to Eliade is his distinction of, he had these ideas of the sort of the sacred and what he called the profane. And it's easier to say mundane instead of profane, because we have this idea of evil, blasphemy, blah, blah, blah. That's what profanity means. He wasn't talking about that. He was talking about basically the profane, the mundane, just being that sort of day-to-day where you're just getting caught up in all the dust and the crap, and I'm beefing with my neighbor, I have this dumb problem at work, I have my car, whatever. Your human muggle problems, as it were. And then the sacred, I don't care how, whatever you want to call that, he sort of went into it as that is the interruption to that dusty, whatever, monotonous, sterilized muggle life, in a modern life, whatever. And the sacred is that point of regeneration. It is where you can experience that catharsis, where you do experience that growth. And it's sort of, I think, even for the most mystical person, and often for the most mystical people among us, it is the challenge to know how to dive in and out of those, to balance them, because there's a saying that I love, that the ancient Celts had about the other world, which is sort of that realm of spirit, of the sacred, and it wasn't meant for humans to live there full time. They specifically said that mortals that venture to the other world emerge either mad or poets.
Wow.
Which there's a lot to that, because like you were sort of talking about the ability to share your experience, to share what you know. That's really what, when they said poet, they didn't mean like someone that could write a rhyming Hallmark card. They're talking about like a filé, like a bard, like someone who could, distill and temper that experience into something that connects communities. So, long way of agreeing and concurring with that.
No, that's neat. That's neat. I remember when I was a Mason, there was an outlook of the 24 hours of the day was crossed over to a 24-inch gauge, a 2-foot ruler. And the idea was the outlook was, hey, 8 hours is for rest, sleep. 8 hours is for your vocation. And then they go 8 hours is a dedication to deity. And that was actually a stumbling block to me, and it still is,
Sure.
Because I think for us things intertwine more than that.
Oh, yeah.
I think even if we're in our vocation, sometimes we're experiencing deity there.
That's infused into it, for sure.
And sometimes when we're on those other 8 hours, sometimes, you can maybe find deity in everything.
Sure.
But the reality is in those 8 hours, you may not be. Or maybe you're sleeping and you're having dreams and visions.
Oh, yeah.
That deity is invading your sleep time with. Or you wake up with a great amount of peace or unrest, where there's this struggle and this fight in the middle of night, where you're experiencing, deity. So that was sort of a stumbling block, for me with masonry. But I think a lot of I think life is just this amazing, beautiful tapestry that we're all creating, and I think all humans are worthy of love and worthy of respect and worthy of their stories being told and listened to and heard.
Absolutely. And something that you sort of mentioned with I don't know, I'm thinking of this in this second, but you were talking about sort of Jesus like dropping 3 words and then piecing out kind of deal.
Yeah.
There was I have mixed opinions about it before I even talk about it, but there is a movie that was called Mary Magdalene with Joaquin Phoenix as Jesus, which sounds odd.
Okay, haven't seen it.
I've been erecting
Sounds interesting.
It really is, because I'll save my thoughts for after. What I found the most interesting was that is how they portrayed him. They portrayed him, to me, as this almost like tortured shamanic type who was so deeply in that, sort of sense of divinity that he almost couldn't handle being around people. And they sort of think I have my mixed thoughts on it. I don't really love how they portrayed Mary, in my opinion. They kind of sterilized her, which is ironic considering they made it to be this like feminist, whatever bullshit, sorry. Because what annoys me is they made her not a prostitute. And I'm like, fuck you, that was important. It was important that she was the quote-unquote dirtiest of the dirtiest, and that she was still worthy of love and mercy. Yeah. And there's this sort of alchemical idea of, this is my woo-woo showing, but this sort of sacred marriage between, fuck it, I'll just get into it. From my perspective, I see Christ as like a sacred king. And there's these different sacred king figures across mythologies, and he's almost the highest evolution of that, because it's all these mythologies and forms of faith across time that synthesize into this one figure of like logos, of like unconditional love, of they call it the word made flesh. Yeah. And I'm intrigued by that on multiple levels, because also in Druidry, this is how St. Patrick got the Irish, by the way. He wasn't genociding them, which pagans love to feel oppressed, so they think that that's what happened. It's not. From my observation,
I think that's humanity in general. It's like, woe is me, the martyrdom,
It's like, dude, I get that you want to be oppressed so bad. Like, look at the Inquisition if you want to feel oppressed for being a mystic, which we weren't alive, by the way, sorry. But it's like St. Patrick was one old man with no army. You can talk about cultural, assimilation as a form of genocide, whatever, but he wasn't killing people. He was appealing to the fact that, like the pagan Irish, for one, are obsessed with the number 3, so they have sort of similar overlapping thoughts of the Trinity. But, he was looking at what they had in common, and one of those things was the concept of truth was so sacred and so magical that it was seen as on par with the rest of the powers that be, the rest of the elements. So you have a sacred king figure like Christ, who is that word made flesh, who represents that. So he was focusing on that. And I find that interesting because also, and I'll rein myself in a second, the Celtic Church is responsible for, they're the reason we even know half of what we know about the Druids, about their beliefs. They didn't simply, they were not Rome. Like, it was a very different experience. And frankly, the Celtic Church, if they had had more sway at like the Council of Nicaea and stuff like that, the church, as we call it today, would look very different.
Yeah.
Because let me rein myself in. Anyways, this is my problem. This is why
too much going on.
There's so much.
I hear you. I hear you. My mind goes there.
It's like five.
Wanders around. That's sort of
It's the horses just pulling my brain apart.
Yeah, you're very bright, and that's hard when people are bright. There's multiple trains of thoughts and things firing. Sometimes I'm like, man, I'm probably the dumbest one in my family, but I'm like, what would it be like to have like a 90 IQ and just be like a happy dude walking around like, cool,
it's gotta
I'm
be
good, I got my bedroom, got my lunch,
respectfully, it's gotta be so nice. I think about that, I'm like, ignorance really gotta be, but then sometimes
or simplicity. I would go with simplicity because we overcomplicate our minds and our lives oftentimes. But go on.
Oh no, please, thank you. For one, I am not arrogant because it drives me insane. Like, it's not helpful. I'm like 27 still figuring out what I want to do because I'm like, how do I rein in these horses? But like, what I liked about the film was that I think, it illustrated, sterilizing Mary aside, which I'm not a fan of, it seemed like it would accurately, following the spirit of the law, if not the letter, it seemed like that would be the experience of if there was a Christ figure in real life. In the movie, they sort of depict his apostles, not terribly, but not very flatteringly. They sort of make them like, they're all following him for different reasons. One of them takes him literally and is like, oh, I want you to bring my family back from the dead. The other one is like wanting a political revolution. They all have their own reasons, which I think is just human. And whereas he's fully in. And what bonds him and Mary in the film is she's sort of the only one that asks him, like, what does God feel like? What does it feel like to be? And he's like, no one ever asks me that. They all want me to do shit for them.
Wow.
And I loved it. I thought it was beautiful and just very touching. And I guess I understand why there's this whole, once you get deeper in the woo-woo world, there's like this whole, no disrespect to them, there's this whole like rose lineage, like new age women that are really into Mary. And which, understandable, I'm very into her myself. But they have this concept that she was never a prostitute, and she was actually like the greatest at wit. And I'm sure she was a disciple. I'm sure she was an apostle, whatever. But I don't understand the need to sterilize her. So, anyways, I recommend the film. I really liked it. I thought it was cool.
It's always good to think about these things, and in that period of life, from what non-theist archaeologists and people who studied history, women weren't really respected or had a high level in that time. So it's pretty cool that Jesus is like, cool, you guys can think what you want. I'm going to hang out with a woman at the well, and I'm going to share my water with a Samaritan. Think what you will, Absolutely. It's like you're missing it,
Yeah.
And it's neat that we can see that women were revered in a lot of these interactions.
Absolutely. So I feel like I could go off about this, but like people sort of look at with eyes that are a little too critical, coming from a place of like the modern day lens of like, well, if a woman isn't like on totally equal par with a man, if we're not competing for CEO, then we're not equal. And I'm like, there's a little more to the equation than that, in my opinion, but I will restrain myself. So.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has their own path. Like, I joke around because I didn't graduate high school. I got halfway through my GED. I dropped out in like 10th grade and went and traveled and started doing businesses and record labels and punk rock shows. And I did that, and I read a lot. We always had a library in the house. And my wife, she double masters, you know, and on paper, just you know, killing it, you know.
Totally.
And I'm like, my joke with her, and it's not really a joke, but I'm like, I want the minivan.
Yeah.
I want to be a soccer dad.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's awesome. This morning, before you came by, I was doing laundry and dishes, made the kids breakfast this morning, put away the food. I'm, you know, taking out the trash and, you know, picking fruit from the trees and doing that. And I'm like, this is rad. I'm like, so people get too caught up in, I'm not supposed to be this way, or if I'm a woman and I'm progressive, I need to work. It's like, there's so many women that hit stages in their life and they passed up motherhood and they end up lamenting that, you know, and it's like, that's sad, you know, that's really sad. And for me at this point, I'm like, I just want to hang out with my kids. Aww. You know, I'm cool with that. I'm cool with being a stay-at-home dad. I mean, people could judge me and say what they want. I'm like, cool, go ahead.
No, you know, that's it.
So I tell Crystal,
life.
I'm like, hey, go out, get you know, make some money. You know, let's become a one-income family.
Yeah,
you know?
sugar mommy.
I got no problem with that. I've been busting my ass for 35 years. I'm like, I'm ready to, you know.
Sure.
Play board games and watch Disney films, and, you know, garden with the kids, you know.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we shouldn't be worried. Everybody has their own path, and we've just really got to embrace it, you know, and attack it, and just go for it and be fearless and tenacious. So
something I truly believe, especially, and this comes up when I'm a bigger fan of conversation and just neutral discussion rather than debate. I don't take any pleasure in that kind of like verbal blood sport sort of thing. Yeah. When that sort of tone starts to come up for me when I'm having conversations across faith or across different kinds of beliefs, I'm like, look, there are so many different kinds of people in the world. Even if let's take it back in time a little bit. You have your farmers, your warriors, the priest class, whatever. Why would all of these people have the same beliefs? Why would they practice the same way? Why would they go after the same things? Why would they live the same life?
Yeah.
And then bring that to the present day where we have even more options of what we can be. We can argue about the utility of too many options, but we have them. So it to me, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why would the same uniform thing work for everyone?
Yeah. It's just, I think that's important to thinking back on my journey of faith. I was like, man, I'm a pretty shitty human being. Like, if I believe in reincarnation, I'm probably going to come back like a worm. Or like, you know, maybe if I'm lucky, like some sort of cool like grasshopper or something, you know. But I'm like, man, can be depraved at times. So I'm like that didn't really sit well with me. And it's, I mean, it can bring a cohesiveness to community, which is important. My brother-in-law was telling me his outlook is if 1% of society just says, hey, we're just going to go nuts, that will throw things out of bounds. If 1% of society goes, we're just going to march in a completely different direction, where we're seeing it. Like, I go to Home Depot and I can't buy a tool off the shelf anymore. I got to find some elusive pumpkin person hiding in a pumpkin patch. And you know, inside of some racking system somewhere. I'm like, hey, bro, can you get me this tool? Because, you know, we have a certain amount of society saying, hey, it's just cool for me to go in and take this, you know? So it can really, cohesiveness of society is important. And I think any worldview shouldn't be exclusive.
Right.
I'm not trying to sound egotistical, but I'm glad I wasn't born dumb.
Yeah.
If I was born if I was born dumb and there was a religion where you had to be smart,
Oof.
I'd be like, damn, missed the boat.
I'm fucked. Yeah.
I was born dumb. My mom decided to drink too much and was just pregnant with me, Sorry, and I'd just be asked out. So I think any kind of worldview should be able to speak to all people. And if it's not speaking to all people, that leaves a bad taste in my mouth, where if not everybody has access to it.
Absolutely. And something that I find appealing about what I'll call the richer spiritual traditions is, I think that there are different in routes for all different kinds of people. And I've often thought to myself, like, if I lived in a time where Christianity was sort of maybe the only spiritual avenue that I could access easily without being burnt or hung or whatever, I probably would have been a nun. Because I find, you were mentioning the Trappist monks and what have you, I find that way of life deeply, sometimes appealing, frankly. Because I'm like, fuck, if I keep getting driven insane by all these different options and my mind, going all these 10 different directions, the idea, especially of like taking a vow of silence and like just being a hermit somewhere with other like spiritual seekers, I would love that. I would actually love it. But something that to your point of, not being exclusionary in terms of not being for all kinds of people, I think that real divinity is going to be experienced in different ways by different people. And again, like, I find that very encouraging and fascinating because I'm built how I'm built, and this is totally random, but at this point I do not care, whatever. So my folks and I mentioned my mother's Jewish, my father's, he's progressively become a more intense Christian across his life. He was sort of raised by very agnostic type, atheist type people, which was interesting for his period of time he grew up in the South, but his parents just didn't care about religion. He started going to church, he's told me, by himself when he was like 5 or 10, just always been a very religious person. And I've sort of joked that my parents and I are all just different flavors of zealot. We're all different kinds of religious extremists.
That's funny.
But we have that, I think we have that same fire, and I bond with them over that in our different ways. And what the hell was I talking about? Where was I going with this? Oof. I don't remember at all. Never mind. Oh, wait, yes I do. I found it.
Okay.
So,
good job.
Thank you. I was getting them into, they're on the very, 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 they've always been extremely conservative. I am closer to the anarchist, libertarian, whatever. I don't like labels at all, but I'm closer to that camp. But I'm huge on free speech.
Yeah.
I'm a total absolutist when it comes to free speech.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. And that's something that we very strongly bond on. And I was getting them into Christopher Hitchens, who none of us, I don't agree with the man on a whole lot, frankly, but he had a tremendous intellect, and he had his defense of free speech, his 20-minute speech on it specifically, I think is crucial listening for everyone. And I bring him up precisely because, talk about people being built different and not experiencing things the same way. I don't feel the need for like everyone on earth to engage spiritually, because I think you have people like Hitchens who I think are just sort of built without that gene. And in Celtic mysticism, we have this idea of like, some people call it the Celtic chakras. I think that's kind of reductionist, but whatever. But you have these sort of like internal, external, spiritual and physical centers in the body that speak to the cauldron of life, which is exactly what you think it is. It's in the genitals, you're creating with it. Then you have the cauldron of the heart, which speaks to vocation specifically. Then the cauldron of the mind for wisdom, vision, and clarity. And they would say that some people are just born with some of them upside down. Some people have more than others, whatever. And to very roundaboutly connect it to, there are literally just crazy concept, different kinds of people in the world. I think that, we need all of those perspectives. And I think anti-theism is stupid. And I think it's an intelligent person's way of being dumb, but I still love listening to Hitchens, and even as someone that's averse to debate, to his debates, because I love the way that his mind worked. And I think that there are, speaking to ideas that possess you, some people are simply, they're an avatar for that thing. And so I don't really care what you say your beliefs are, I care what you do. And your actions are really like what stands out. And I'm very, when it comes to like monks or whether you're an anti-theist debater or whatever the fuck you are, I'm fascinated by people who really cultivate and refine whatever they are almost an avatar for. Long way of saying
that's neat.
Yeah.
I think there's, I talked about some of the positive attributes, some of just like core tenets that I think are healthy for all of society.
Yeah.
I think a bad one that I've been guilty of at times is pride.
Sure.
Pride can fuck us up. Like, I have a family member that is an alcoholic, but pride stops people, I think, from dealing with their issues, because like, I don't have a problem, I'm too smart for that,
right?
And I've been stuck doing similar things like that. Pride is very bad. So I think some people have such intellect, and they're so drawn, like you were saying before, like the armchair, sit and read books and do that. They're so inclined to that in such a heavy way.
Yeah.
They're forgetting to go out and experience the world. They're forgetting to look at the stars. They're forgetting to interact with nature. They're forgetting to just slow down and just enjoy. They're so focused on study, and their mind gets so scrambled.
Right.
I think sometimes they're forcing that chakra to be turned upside down because they're shutting themselves out.
Absolutely.
And then when people go down a singular path, oftentimes they're esteemed in that one area.
Yes.
So then when you get this outlook where society is looking at you as this grandiose person, that's making your pride even bigger, and it makes you feel like I'm going the right way because I'm getting all of this positive reinforcement of going this direction.
It's a dangerous thing.
It stops them from widening their views. So I think that's why travel is important, interacting with other people. And even in the Trappist outlook, they're still interacting within community, and it's neat. There was one monk up there in New Clairvaux that was he was like a big prospect to go professional for baseball, and he decided to become a monk. And I was watching this little documentary, and he's out there. They make wine, and he's playing baseball in the wine vineyards, And like, I think the nuns will come by periodically. Got like a nun being the pitcher, and he's
so cool.
75 years old playing baseball out in the field. So it's like, it didn't reduce his passions or who he was. They maybe didn't culminate in a professional career, which a lot of people would esteem, but he's still holding on to his love, even though he's within this monastic construct. And I think it's neat how the Trappists believe that they should be self-supporting, because there's other monastic paths that were like, we're doing this holy work, you guys, it's your obligation to support us. But they're like, yo, we'll make beer, we'll make wine, we'll cultivate honey, we'll be beekeepers, the redwood nuns make jam. And I think when you're doing work and you're doing it side by side, there's lessons in that. And when they're making this product, it's not closing them off to society. They still have a connection to the world, even though they're within their own community of sort of peace and solitude. And what's neat is the rest of the noisy world, that's where I live, that's where I embrace, that's where I interact, can go and step into that realm and witness that realm and go, wow, this is cool. I may not go into it 100%, but hey, if I can go for a couple days and embrace this environment that they created. And it's neat. If anybody's near Vina, in Northern California, they are putting together a thing called Sacred Stones, which they William Randolph Hearst bought an old chapter house from, I think it was France, from 1,000 years ago, and brought that over. He owed San Francisco money, so he gave the chapter house to San Francisco. This monastic order started bugging San Francisco for like 40 years, like, give us back our chapter house. Finally they did, so they brought it over, and they're rebuilding this giant stone chapter house in Vina, which is neat, a 1,000-year-old building here in California.
That's so cool to me. And That is one of the things that does draw me about the sort of Catholic tradition, is they really have, I understand people criticizing, like, oh, like, it's corrupt to have worldly things, blah, blah, blah. But there is something to be said for having a place that induces reverence and awe. And that brings you into that sort of sacred space mentality, I feel like, in a large way. Not that they don't have other problems, obviously, but something that I also really enjoy about the sort of Celtic cauldrons is the cauldron of the heart, as it were. It's said by, and this is like a long, like, riddly, mystical poem, the Song of Amergin, that tells us about the different cauldrons. And it's said of the cauldron of the heart that they can be turned, but that it's turned from great sorrow, great joy, or by making a spiritual pilgrimage. And I thought that it was interesting what they deemed like soul-shaking enough to actually change something so fundamental about yourself, and that pilgrimage would be included among them. So that I guess just ties into the importance of having places like that too, because most people, some people will be built for that life, but plenty of people will not be. Like, most of us do live in the outside world, and it's crucial to have places like that, I think.
Yeah, and removing ourselves from our environment. I mean, post-COVID, a lot of people are, agoraphobic and staying in little realms, and I think there's a certain amount of, like, trust and faith in humanity that we need when we take a pilgrimage. Now we can be a little bit safer with cars and cell phones and such, but back in the day, you're like going and you're having to have faith, like, if you don't make it to this next city, somebody will have some sort of love and compassion where they'll be like, hey, here's some food, or here's somewhere to sleep, or there's a certain faith that we need to have to make those pilgrimages and experiences, obviously, that will undergo. And it's ridiculous when you see, like, Sunni and Shiite Muslims beefing, or within Christian sects, they're beefing over stuff. It's sort of absurd, and I think it's just people that are fearful. I think the Catholics do beauty very well, and I have a hard time finding somebody that doesn't like beauty. Right. It's like there's beauty in some of the traditions, and in the sense of, like, going to some Orthodox churches and Coptic churches, just the smells and the incense, and there's beauty in all that. There's beauty in ceremony. Absolutely.
That's something else that I kind of go back and forth with my father about, because he's I think he's just built very, like, he's one of the biggest art lovers I know. He can appreciate beauty as much as the next person, but in his religious outlook, I think he would have been happy as, like, a Puritan. Like, he wants he doesn't even want a Christmas tree. He wants nothing. Whereas, I love symbols. Like, as a pagan, I think that's what draws a lot of us in and it's not, I've come to enjoy conversations as an adult. When I was a kid, I was like, get off my back, stop questioning everything. And now I'm like, no, I'm secure enough. You please question it. Like, I'm happy to tell you why it's meaningful to me. And he's like, I don't get you guys in the damn icons. And I'm like, I'm happy to tell you. It's me personally, I don't speak for anyone else. It's not necessarily that I think the symbol or the thing itself is a god. It's, we're human, we're visual, and it's, to me, inspiring to have a reminder of something I'm trying to imbue into my life. And, when it comes to, like, physical, and I've been to, I grew up going to my mom's synagogues of choice, and then as I was getting a little older, I went to church with my father a few times. So not up my alley. I've never felt lonelier in my entire life, actually. But, it's like, this is not for me. And you're surrounded by people. But it's, but I've independently gone to, I'm very drawn to Catholicism and also to, to Orthodoxy, because I've often said if I was going to be pulled by a Christian denomination, it would probably be the Orthodox, because it has what I like about Catholicism. It has that mysticism, but I think letting the priest get married is really, really important. I'm actually huge on that.
No, that starts getting weird.
It's weird.
But having a wife around helps you. Helps you many ways, but one is it invokes a certain amount of holiness because you have somebody seeing you every moment of your
Oh,
life
yeah.
that calls you out on your crap.
Yep.
You know? And there's a beauty in that.
Yeah.
I remember I went to a Serbian Orthodox church in Northern California. It was like a bunch of hippies ended up finding this in NorCal in the 70s, and they embrace this form of orthodoxy.
Cool.
And one of the big gripes of it is, they're worshiping the saints, and they're venerating, they're worshiping Mary, and they're worshiping saints. And when I went and talked to the priest, he goes, no, just like you would find an author, say C.S. Lewis is inspirational to you. He goes, these people are inspirational to us. And it was interesting. They were perceiving the aspect of, there's a verse that says like, petitioning the saints to pray for you. Conservative, modern American Christianity looks at that as somebody asking somebody else on the human realm to pray for them. But Orthodoxy goes, we're in a bigger environment where they believe that the saints, they can talk to them and say, hey, you're chilling, I jokingly say, on a cloud somewhere with a harp. You're hanging out. You probably have nothing better to do right now.
Right.
Can you say some prayers for me? Can you petition the deity on my behalf? And they're inspired by these saints that live these lives. To influence them like we would modern authors or ancient authors.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really neat thing where he goes, no, they aren't deity, but we have this connection to them. And now I'm starting to lean more towards that, even though I sort of programmed not to. That makes more sense to me. I haven't done it, but I go, hey, I get you guys. You guys are being sort of demonized without being listened to. And I think the Coptic and Orthodoxy, there's a lot of neat stuff going on there. And I think the Catholic Church is getting neater. I remember as a kid I went and they were still speaking in Roman. I don't know if in Latin. The Roman Catholic Church, and I'm 50 years old. That was probably 45 years ago. Yeah. Talk about boring. I'm like, okay, some of this ceremony sort of interesting. I get to get up and get some holy water and eat a cracker, and I'm like, this sort of cool. But a lot of it, I'm like, well, what the hell are they saying?
Right.
And I'm like, take a nap, but you can't, because when you're ready to take a nap, it's like, stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down. I'm like, okay, they nap-proof this thing. Probably intentionally. But for me as a kid, I'm like, I sort of knew as a kid, I go, what did I get out of this? I didn't understand what they were saying. It was sort of like seeing a play that I didn't quite understand.
That's a tough one for me, because I also, like, growing up, going to synagogue, the ones that I went to, a lot of it was in Hebrew, which I, funny enough, was my first language, but my mom got so worried that I wasn't going to, like, assimilate, because she's first generation Persian, like, from Iran, and, obviously I look, like people don't believe me when I say I'm half Persian, but she got worried, and now I recognize some words. I no longer really speak Hebrew at all. But so anyways, I'm sitting here in this like dusty freaking environment, and I'm just like, I'm gonna kill this is so boring. Like, I feel nothing. But as an adult, like, as someone, like, I'll go to a Catholic mass sometimes because I find it really peaceful. I love the ceremony of it. And I kind of don't like it when they talk too much in English. I'm like, let me just have I like the Latin. But that's where I think it's different, obviously, like, for kids and for adults, because what we're seeking is very different things. And I think when you're trying to, like, bring kids into something, you gotta carol, you throw them a bone. Like, you have to, if you're gonna involve them, I think you should let them in on the experience somehow. Whereas adults, not to speak for everyone, we're jaded, we're tired, we're overwhelmed. Like, I can appreciate the sort of solitary, reflection of, I don't even know what they're saying, we're just invoking something together. But when I was a kid, I would have been, I've said I'm not even joking, if the Jewish synagogues would have been outside, if they would have let me do music, like, if there would have been more, this is what drew me to paganism, is I wanted lived experience. And I wanted to go back to the topic again, is like, I love the idea that myth and ritual are two sides of the same coin. and that the function of ritual, the playing out of it, is to live the myth, because, you know, when we're talking about the saints and what have you, and how Christians aren't necessarily worshiping them per se, they're engaging with them to petition God, divinity on their behalf. And I think, you know, like humans, we're drawn to just different narrative experiences. That's what myth is. When we're inspired by specific saints or people, to me it harkens back to like the sort of mortals in the pagan myths who achieve audience with the gods based on their skills, based on their life. And I think like we're just built how we're built. We're human beings. Like we're striving for that audience with divinity, however we can achieve it. So
sort of reminds me of Saint Francis, which was like
I love him.
Preach a gospel with everything you do, and when necessary use words. So he was diving so much into like the ritual, the experience. How do we live? How do we interact? What does love look like? What does grace look like? And mercy and kindness, and what does all this look like? And we can achieve all that without words. And it's sort of when anybody gets up on a big bully pulpit with a megaphone, it's like, bro, just put it down. Just go out and live. You'll be more impactful.
Absolutely.
Living and loving than yelling on your bully pulpit. You know, it doesn't make sense.
That's not how the thing. So I've tried to bring this up to people sometimes when I notice that happening, especially online. I'm like, in your experience, has this ever worked on anyone? Does this work? You know, because the answer is kind of obvious. No, nobody likes that, whether they're right or wrong. And if it does quote unquote work, that person is probably so scared and so insecure and just going for the loudest bullying voice that's not even a meaningful experience. They're not experiencing divinity. They're just fucking scared. Yeah,
it's not healthy for anybody on either side. You know? Have you, with mom and dad, have you ever tried a messianic service?
I can't say I have.
A Jewish messianic service. I ended up going to one, and you were talking about like dance and ritual and music. Cool. Like
they do that?
Get in circles. They're partying. They're noisy. They're loud.
I love it.
You know, it was a really interesting experience. It's been a while since I've done it again, again, but it was sort of neat. I think in Judaism there's great tradition. And I think when you look for it or you find the right paths, I mean, they know how to party. You know, you just got to find the right path. You know, so who knows? Maybe mom and dad can merge at that realm. You know.
I would love to see it. I mean, they're both, when I say we're all different kinds of religious extremists, I'm really not kidding. Like, they're very, very, like, I don't see them going for it. But I find that stuff super cool. And I don't want to shit on Judaism per se, just what I grew up with, you know, is clearly for plenty of people. It's just not for me. The same way that, like, I'm looking for, like, my dream, I've, not to go too much into it, one of my dream rituals to experience is, I've done hook pulls, but I haven't done a hook suspension. And it's something that I've been cooking in my mind for years as like, I want it to be at the right time for the right reasons, because to me it's devotional. And I want it to mark, you know, like an initiatic experience in my life. Like, I want all of my tattoos are the same thing. And this is where, like, I'm not a tattoo artist. I don't pretend to any clout or authority in that world, but just to maybe come off as an asshole, I don't relate to the people that just, like, get them to get them. I don't relate to obviously, it's freaking America. It's a free country. Do whatever you want. But I don't... This is where, again, like, I really believe in the initiatic quality of pain. Because, and this bullshit of, like, I don't know if you've seen... There are these... It seems to be mostly rappers that are, like... Not just numbing cream, which is one thing, and I'm against it. I will never. I'll fucking pass out before I do it. They fully go under. I mean, they are like they're not. And I'm like, you're a coward. You're the biggest. And then they're getting these like full body sleep. I'm like, everyone involved is a coward. I don't care how much they're fucking paying you. It's disgraceful. Like, you should. I'm sorry, especially if it's a bigger piece. You should earn it.
I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. And when you can embrace it, there's been times where my friend Sherry, who tattooed me, I don't think I'm this tough anymore, but she was tattooing my feet like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was reading and I took a nap.
Wow.
And she's like, hey, hey. And I'm asleep, and I think my brother was there and one of the other artists. And she's like, did he die? They're like, no, he's sleeping.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think
some people do that.
When you can embrace it, you can tap into it and get an endorphin rush like you would get from suspension.
Yes.
And riding through that is a journey in and of itself. And when you ride through that, it pulls a great amount of energy from you, which can drain you quite a bit afterwards. But tattoos are an expression of ourselves, which can be very insightful.
Yes.
Some people get them. It used to be when I was a kid, tattoos would start out more hidden, and then as you filled up your torso and your upper arms, then they'd start coming down, and it would start going. It was almost like a virus that was spreading from your chest, and it would come out through the body. And now it's funny when I go to like I was at the punk rock fest, and macho dudes with their shirts off. Yeah. When they take their shirts off, they're tattooed from here to their fingertips and their necks, and they have nothing else.
Wild. So
a lot of that's projecting. They're trying to project an image of, hey, I'm the crazy guy, or I'm the, look at me. So, these people that are getting anesthetics, it's not that we can't love them. We have the right to think anything stupid. Totally. I think a lot of things are stupid on the planet.
I'm not stopping you.
But I fall more into the libertarian path as you. But what it tells us is these people are trying to create a certain image.
Right.
It's not that they're getting a tattoo to mark a certain time or a certain thought consciously. They're doing it unconsciously, where they're trying to create an image of who they are or who they think the world wants them to be.
Yes.
So if our brains are firing right and we're looking at society, we can go, okay. You can look at it sort of as sad. A lot of times when I was young, what I would get angry at, now I get pity at. When I was young, I was angry at my dad because he wasn't a present father. Yeah. But then when I got older, I'm like, damn, man, you missed out on a relationship. You had 4 biological sons that were weird, cool as fuck kids. And you had foster kids and adopted kids. Wow. And you didn't get to experience that. It's like, bro, you're the one that lost. Like, I navigated through life. I made it. I got kids, a wife, a vocation. But I'm like, you missed out on that. So it's more like things can turn more into pity and empathy instead of being angry. So we can identify for something is what it is and look at it for the truth of what it is. But then we go, what do we need for that? What does that person need? What that person probably needs is somebody tell them, hey, bro, I'm going to love you whether you get put under sedation and get your whole face tattooed or not. I'm actually not going to think of you differently really much one way or another.
Yeah, it's okay.
Actually, if you get your face tattooed under sedation, you get a bunch of dumb shit on it, I may think you're a little bit dumb.
Yes.
But I'm still going to love you, you know? And I'm going to go, you know what, just like Daryl, I forgot his last name. That's very valid and a beautiful thing that he did for society. But we can make our impacts on society going, bro, you went the wrong way, but I'll still love you. And hey, the right direction's over here. You're like a guy directing traffic or a woman directing traffic of like, hey, you don't need to do that,
That's definitely the more loving perspective, and it's probably more effective. And I suppose part of it probably is an age thing, because as much as I try to be hopefully like a little more mature, I like to say that I'm post crazy. I used to be balls to the fucking wall, like nuts. I still, I have my snobby streaks, and it's not actually, I need to keep telling myself it's not actually always helpful, or maybe sometimes it's funny. That's the problem. And that's that pride
you gotta
thing.
Laugh,
Right, I think I'm fucking hilarious. And I don't know, but the pride thing is fair.
Yeah, and with constructs of society, when we look at paying taxes, there's a guy that worked for me years ago, and he got his face tattooed, and then he decided that he didn't really want to work. He was capable to work. Yeah. But, 20 years ago, before everybody's getting their faces tattooed, before it's so common, he would... he went in and said, "Hey, I'm crazy. I got my face tattooed. I need Social Security." Ooh. And you're going, "Bro, you aren't that crazy. You just probably did a little too many drugs, which you can stop.
Yep.
You can get your tattoo removed, or you can work a job that accepts it, and you can become a member of society." So sometimes we fall into those things where it's like, hey, your actions do affect me. This makes taxes go up because... you can tattoo your face and say, now I can't work, and where in reality you could. It's just it may limit the jobs you work. But
you have to factor that in, yeah.
Yeah, but it's like, well, why are my taxes going towards that? But I guess that's where grace comes into play. And, and maybe you can encourage people like that to start working and do a job they can do with having their face tattooed.
Yeah, I mean, because that really does beg the question of, when, I'll look out, at the, say, the whole tattooing for aesthetics with no experiencing the pain aspects. I look at that and get angry and judgmental and, want them to experience something I find to be important. But that begs the question of, what would actually be connective for us as different kind of types in society? Because no matter what I say, there will always be people who they will never see pain as anything but something that sucks. It's just shitty. There's no value to it. The same way there's people who will just never probably want to work. They just want to, do whatever, get drunk all day. I don't know.
Yeah, be slothful.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm not arrogant enough to think that I can I don't think I can control what anyone does at all, ever. Yeah. In any regard. And that's actually a bigger reason of why I don't debate. I don't preach it. I try to not preach at people. Because nobody cares, and that's not how you reach them, even if you were to reach them. But also I believe that people need to have their own experiences, and that's more meaningful. Yeah. So when it comes to stuff like this, I think at the end of the day, all we can really do, all I can really do, is just exemplify the value of hey, when you're kind of voluntarily not suffering that which needs to be suffered, as Jung put it, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, a lot of physical, sensual, mental, spiritual divorce that you're kind of fostering in yourself that one day will probably catch up to you and bite you in the ass. And I'm not going to knock anyone for that. We all experience that in different ways. Me being post-crazy is definitely a result of, just, it got to be too much. And I'm why am I... Because I think that was part of my going so heavy in the kink world and having an aspect where, I don't know if it's fair to say, I didn't do a ton of physical sessions, but I apprenticed under a professional dominatrix for a couple of years, and I was involved in a whole, kink, quote-unquote, family or house or what have you, and I'm beyond grateful for that whole experience, because how many people can say that they apprenticed in that kind of scenario? That's, and she was also a Buddhist meditation teacher, and we had overlap in that sort of combination of, this is another kind of meditation. This is prayer on the edge. And I was more religious in that, I am very theistic, and she was kind of more atheist. And we parted ways. It makes me sad for political reasons. She's kind of, no hate to her, one of these people who thinks that anyone to the right of Karl Marx is a Nazi. Yeah. And I am to the right of Karl Marx. You got me there. Yeah. So when I started, working out and just eating meat, because I was plant-based my whole entire life until 23, 24. Wow. And I was it was for ethical reasons. I was very passionate about it. And what finally changed my mind was a few things. It was one, I was working out when I realized I was spinning my wheels. Don't fucking come, yes, you can be vegan and be a bodybuilder, but you're eating all day long every day. Your farts are probably horrendous. And there's also a sort of component of okay, I call myself pagan, I call myself a druid, I'm talking about the natural world, and something that annoys me, frankly, is when vegans think they have this moral monopoly, that the only way to revere or respect nature is by not eating animal products. I don't think that's true, because we're removing ourselves, talk about divorce from the sensual, we're removing ourselves from the animal kingdom by doing that. There is no other, plenty of other animals, they're all eating each other. Yeah. We also are animals. We also freaking eat each other.
No doubt.
And that doesn't mean I heard. I'm not the world's biggest Rogan fan, but I was listening to one of his better guest episodes lately where he was talking about. He went on this very interesting rant about how he's a hunter, he's a meat eater, but you can be a carnivore and still hate factory farming because it's taking animal lives in a soulless fashion instead of treating them as like worthy of dignity, and then they have one bad day. Yeah, and I'm more on that side.
Yeah, I know for me, whenever I get the opportunity to be very intimate with meat, I choose it. I had an opportunity to butcher a chicken once, and I'm like, who am I as an omnivore if I can't do this,
Absolutely.
So I think that's important. My wife, I love her. She won't eat meat with bones in it because it brings a reality too close to home. But I think we need to embrace that.
Yes.
I live in a city, so I don't get a chance to go out and hunt much. But if somebody's like, "Hey, bro, you want to go hunting?" I feel like I need to.
Yeah.
And if I killed Bambi, maybe that would make me a vegetarian. I don't know. But I think as omnivores, we need to embrace that interaction and feel those emotions, and
completely
and be at peace with that. I have a very dear friend of mine who's raw vegan, and he was telling me that I have all this, when I eat meat, I'm getting all this meat fear, trauma, anger stuff and I'm like, I think I'm a pretty peaceful dude at this point in my life. When I was a kid, I might have liked fist fights and things, but I'm like, this point in life, I'm pretty chill.
I'm good.
And then I go, well, I started thinking about it. I'm like, whenever somebody challenges me with something, I go, what is there? Is there something there? So I started thinking about it because he's a dear friend of mine. I love the hell out of him. So I started thinking about it, and I go, well, wait a minute. Hitler was a vegetarian, right? I go, it didn't stop him from killing invalids and homosexuals and political dissidents and Jewish people, So I'm like, there's something,
There's, I have come to see it as like, I strongly believe in consciously participating in the animal kingdom. And like, I get that I have a lot of cringe factor at the whole raw carnivore, community myself, but it's from a place of love because I've gone hard the other way. Like, as much as I was fully plant-based for literally since I was 5 years old, as a conscious choice, my parents did not make me do this. You see me, like, some of the piercers at the studio will be like, hey, so what's up with that, you're like eating raw hearts on your Instagram? Like, I was freaking the hell out of that. And I was like,
I don't go on Instagram much, but gnarly. You're eating raw hearts?
Yes.
In the Spanish culture, I think as an anticuchos, they'll cook them.
Oh, yeah.
But that's probably more just bacterial concerns,
Oh, for sure. But for me, like, it's fully a spiritual experience because, and I actually, the raw heart, it's not like an everyday thing, right? It's I'm choosing to do it as a ritual experience. Yeah. And I want to fully immerse myself in this is the reality of eating meat. This thing had a fucking heart. Yeah. You had a life the same way that I did. Yeah. And also, we're all going to die one day. Yeah. And all life, is contingent on eating other life in some way or another. We're all feeding on each other. And you can do that. In my perspective, there are basically two virtues, which is honor and hospitality. And hospitality is basically upholding your end of the bargain of being alive. Yeah. Whatever. And you have to navigate that for yourself. And for me, like, also city person. Total city person. But when I was vegetarian and vegan, I had one belief that I still hold now, which is if you're going to eat meat, you should damn well be able to look it in the eye and kill it yourself. And now I'm like, okay, that's a difference. I'm willing to do that. Yeah. If you're not, you probably should be vegetarian, frankly. Yeah. Because, I don't know what you think you're doing.
And then I heard the thing about, like, when they're growing vegetables in a field, a lot of, like, the field life in nature are dying, from around there, The farmer that's grown those vegetables is taking out the little critters with a 22 that are popping their head up,
You are, and that's the thing, too, is, like, there is no life without death. And the more that you try, I think, to sort of wash your hands of that, you're just blinding yourself to the reality of it, because all this like clearing land for fucking soy and all this, I'm sorry, like eraser Frankenstein lab meat that's not meat that people are eating that they claim is healthy, and I'm like, I'm not touching that shit with a 50-foot pole. It's not healthy. It's all the little rodents and varmints and whatever that are getting killed to make room for that. So it's like, are we just, to go back to Nietzsche, who talked about like morality is, like it or not, based on aesthetics, because you look at are you going to kill, when it comes to killing little insects, like, are you going to kill the cockroach or the butterfly? Why? Because the butterfly is pretty.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. So suddenly the little hamsters and shit in the fields, they don't matter.
Yeah.
Like, you're making a judgment call based on aesthetics. So I don't feel differently about animals, per se. Not to go off on this, but I think it's worth considering. And that's kind of the point, is like to be fully engaged with all of the sensory elements of life.
Yeah.
So even though like I went on a road trip recently to go see my brothers in Oregon, and for one, it was humbling and cool to see how much of California is so kind of empty and just quiet and not LA, to say the least.
Yeah.
And I drove by this, I don't know exactly what it was. They had a fuck ton of cows and probably
Harris Ranch.
Yeah, probably.
They call that Cowschwitz for anybody who's gone up the 5 freeway.
That sounds about right. It smells horrible.
It smells like shit for about about 3 miles, and
windows closed, AC on. I could still
even
smell
that.
it.
Yeah, no, it's
enough.
gnarly.
Yeah.
I wish I could hold my breath for 3 minutes, because
Me too.
A lot of methane going on there.
Oh, way too much. And I was like, okay, this kind of ain't it either. But what do you, I mean, that's kind of the thing of like, when it comes to the like this like modern overwhelm, I don't believe in glorifying the past, because there's no going back, but this is why it's one of the reasons I think we're all struggling cognitively, is because humans were never supposed to be this piled on top of each other.
Yeah.
Like, and this fact that we're aware of like every fucking tragedy that's happening at every corner of the earth every second of the day.
Yeah.
And then you have to post about it or you don't care. It's like, Jesus Christ. Like, give yourself 5 seconds to exist as a human being.
Yeah, no doubt.
Oh.
So, good things would be is like, we moved into this house a couple years ago, and one of the things I like about it is like having just something as simple as a porch.
Oh my God.
And I've had friends come over and hang out where it's like, let's have a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And I've had a couple friends I've done that with where they're like, wow, man, like, it was almost like they did LSD or something, like, wow, man, that was the most like eye-opening thing. And it's like, wow, just to go, hey, let's set our phones down, let's have a cup of coffee, we'll just sit back and hang out, enjoy the sun coming into the day, and just kick back, and it's like, so I think that's important for anybody who listens to this, that we find those moments of just community and peace together, where we are trying to not feel as stacked up on each other as we are.
Absolutely. And I guess to sort of maybe end on that note, is there anything else that you would want to share or end on?
No, this has been awesome. If anybody wants to send any hate mail, love mail,
you're welcome to
send it on over. Nathan's Tattoos and Piercings, we have an email, and if I've been an asshole, let me know. If I've been decent, let me know. I'll take constructive criticism.
Love it.
Sometimes even when people get mad at me, I laugh. So if there's any Karens out there, bring it on. It's all experiencing life like we've been talking about, and looking at it head on, and living in that. So.
Absolutely. As the late great Christopher Hitchens said probably a few times, anyone that as a free speech supporter, he would say anyone who would like to criticize him is more than welcome and encouraged to do so at their own peril.
Yep.
Because he would just wipe the floor with you.
Yeah, that is brilliant.
But thank you for your time. I really love your perspective. I thank you for your insight.
Thank you. This is always great. It's neat to just take these moments and just chat and hang out and learn. And so thank you for that.
My pleasure. Well, I like to always end these on the same note, which is, I guess I'll plug myself. I am Primal Druidry basically everywhere if you want early access to stuff like this. I have a Patreon where I write, I share my written reflections, and I'll post my YouTubes before they get published by a couple of days. So if you want to support that, it's Primal Druidry on Patreon. I'm not gonna lie, I'm scheduling most of my posts on Instagram because I'm trying to not be on social media too much. But otherwise, thank you for listening. But now close your computer, put your phone down, go outside, and go do some magic. Thank you for listening.